I'd like to welcome everybody to this Zoom video. This is actually the first in a series of videos we're going to be doing called Conversations About Art. My name is Alan Constant. I'm from Albuquerque, New Mexico, and with me is Paul Rowland from Tokyo, Japan. And today we're going to be talking to Sue Canuteson, an artist from Alexandria, Virginia. So welcome, everybody. And welcome, Sue.
Thank you. Thank you for doing this. It's a privilege.
I'm glad you're able to join us. So yeah, we'd like to talk to you about your work and learn more about what you do and how you do it. Have you had any formal background or training for your art?
You know, I really haven't. I'm pretty much a self-taught artist, although I have taken some online courses along the way that have really helped. And I could toss out a few that stand out. Back in 2019, when I had just started painting, I was just a year into it. I took Nicholas Wilton's Creative Visionary program. That was really enormously helpful. And I also followed that up with Mark Ains's Language of Color. That was very much about color theory, but a very practical approach to it. And then finally, most recently, as I've wanted to work larger, I took a course, online course offered by Julie Schumer and Kat Tesla on painting larger, and that was really great.
And how long have you been painting?
So I guess it's been about 6 years. I started with collage back in 2017, and I started making my own papers and incorporating painting into the collages. And I found that I really liked painting more. And that kind of morphed into painting practice. I took my first and only in studio painting class in the fall of 2018. And that's when it all clicked for me. I knew that I had found my passion, really.
Sue, that's really interesting to hear your progress from collage into painting. Do you feel that your experience with collage has informed how you paint? Because Alan and I were kind of discussing, just when we were talking about your paintings by ourselves, how the arrangement, the organization of them resembled collage, even when collage wasn't there. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, that's interesting. I actually kind of want to move away from that a little bit for something new and different. But that's a wonderful observation, and I absolutely see it. I do love, I've always loved organizing and arranging spaces. And that's actually why I started with collage, because I thought, okay, feels more accessible to me. And I have a small studio, so it was kind of easy to do in a small space. And of course, I love arranging and exploring shapes and lines, and that fed right into that. And that clearly, that has carried over. I see even in my painting, you're right, that it's very much informed by collage. But again, I kind of want to move away from a more controlled, arranged feel to my works. I'm not sure if I'll revert back. I don't know. I have it in my head that's what I want to do. But of course, we all know once we do it, it's the painting dictates what we do. But it's
sure. That's really, really interesting. So you have that sort of interest, that drive, that passion for not so much controlling, but arranging and organizing, but you want to kind of free it up?
Yeah, I do. I have this I have this desire to bring more painterly expressive feelings into the work.
How do you do that? How do you try to do that?
I think by it's kind of in my bones to want to organize and arrange. So that'll always be present in the work. I guess I want the work to be dominated more by the surprises, the accidents, and
Sure,
all the
sure.
marks. I love mark making,
Yeah.
but I, in the past, would edit pretty aggressively. And I kind of want to allow more of that to come through. So it'll be interesting. It's kind of like a dance. It'll be
Mm.
interesting to see what takes shape. I kind of feel like this will be a pivotal year for me. I feel like it's going to be a bit of a shift.
But as I recall, you use a lot of geometric shapes. So
Mm.
are you talking about departing from using those kind of shapes and being more fluid and freeform in your work? Is that
Yeah,
what you're
yes, I
talking
think so, Alan.
about?
Exactly.
Also, the fact that you're a self-taught artist, I mean, do you see any advantage of that over being like formally trained?
Yeah, in my case, I think it was extremely helpful not to be. I think I would have been a disaster in art school because I really do. I'm sure a lot of people benefit from it, but I have I guess reflecting back on my life, I see that my drive to make art comes from this real strong need for self-expression.
Mm.
And um, and in addition to that, I think I have a terrible independent streak. I'm not very good at following instructions. I mean, that surfaced even when I was a kid. I kind of roll my eyes at my behavior sometimes, but I really had trouble with that. So I thought that's why I think I would have been a disaster in art school. And that's, I think, why I really love the option of having online self-paced classes, art classes, because I obviously love learning. I have a lot to learn, but that allows me to kind of do it in my own way,
Mm.
I
You
think.
sound like an artist.
They are some common characteristic, right? Even when I try to follow instructions, I have difficulty. I'm always breaking the rules.
Even your own ones. That's
Yes,
interesting.
exactly.
Oh,
So,
I'm just reminded of something you mentioned about structure. You mentioned it a couple of times in your artist statement, I think, and perhaps
Mhm.
elsewhere. And that stayed with me because I write poems as well, and stories, but more so poetry. And I'm very, very interested by structure, but also the accidents within it. So when you talk
Mm.
about painting, I understand kind of intuitively what you mean, but from another medium. But what do you mean by finding that structure? That really
Yeah,
intrigued.
that's interesting. And I'm so glad you asked that because I guess for me, it's different when I look at my early work versus what I'm doing now, but it's actually more of the focal area in a composition, not the focal point, but the focal area. And that can be um, very bold and clearly defined, as maybe that's evident in some of my earlier collage work. Or it can be really subtle. It could be the use of texture, but in a focal area, or even the use of color or
Mm,
unified line work, something I guess that makes the composition hang together.
one term you use, you talked about focal area versus focal point. I'm really
oh,
curious about that.
Oh,
So when I'm assuming when you say focal area, you're not necessarily talking about the center of the image. So are you talking about
correct.
one element that kind of you want the viewer's eye to go to, or I mean, say more about that. How you think about it.
Yeah, and that's exactly what it is. I say area because you're right. It's not a specific point in the piece, but yeah, I keep going back to structure. Um,
When we look at your work a little bit
yeah,
later, then maybe we could go back into that. Maybe you could show us examples of
yeah,
what.
thank you.
So,
What's interesting is I could think of other artists' work that would exemplify that perfectly.
well,
Uh,
for example, who are you thinking of?
um, well, actually, I was really enjoying some of your past conversations, And Lynn Alker, I think
Yeah.
I love her work, and I see that she's a self-taught artist too. I just discovered it, but I noticed I love her. It almost seems to me that she uses a lot of texture.
Mm.
Yeah.
It almost is a shape within the composition. Her use of texture and her repetition of texture within a composition. And so I guess to me, that's kind of an example of using texture as a structure or something that unifies the composition.
Oh, that's interesting. When you're talking about a kind of rhythm there or repetition of elements, you remind
Maybe,
me of your background in writing. Um, do you think there's some kind of relationship there? Like, I'm so interested by the relationship between different media, and we all consume it, but many of us also create and produce it as well. What is that relationship? You've got writing, collage, painting. How do they all meld in your mind?
yeah. I
Another
think
impossible question.
I know, no, I think actually, Paul, I think it comes down to just my need to express myself. And
Yeah.
I'm trying to explore the best way for me to do that.
Hmm.
And I think at a very young age, I think I mentioned to both of you, I mean, I was 10 when I wrote my first poem. And
Yeah.
I'm not even sure I knew what poems were back then, but that need for self-expression. But to answer your question, I'm not sure whether and just as FYI for the audience, I actually in my professional career I was a writer and an
Hmm.
editor, and I did some tangential work in graphic design, and I actually like the graphic design more. But having said all that, yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure. At least I don't see where my writing and editing background has informed the art practice.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, initially when I was doing collage, I was incorporating text into my
Hmm.
collages. I don't have any samples of that. So I did think of that. But having said that, I think it was the beauty of the lines that appealed to me, not
Hmm.
really the words.
I understand. I know how you feel, and I've been trying to, make connections between maybe my writing and photography, but they do seem separate in some way. I guess I feel influenced by music as well,
Mhm.
and that almost seems to be like the prime metaphor for maybe all art, and even a metaphor for a way of living as well. And you talk about that repetition of elements, that rhythm. Obviously, that appears in writing, in some ways,
Mhm.
but it also appears in your painting. Um, I guess. Yeah, do you feel any connection with music?
Well, it's interesting you should say that. Some of the works I included in the slideshow, I really felt like I was channeling an
Oh,
African musician
oh wow.
that I had discovered. Absolutely continued to. I mean, he passed away a couple of years ago.
Who is it? Who's the
It's
musician?
I hope I'm not, I think
Well,
I pronounces it Ayub Ogada. He's well known. He actually performed
okay.
some of the songs in the soundtrack for The Constant Gardener, the film The
Oh
Constant.
really? Oh my, I love
Oh,
that.
Absolutely. When I watch that film, those songs just resonate. I mean, they still give me goosebumps. And
Oh, thank you.
when I
Okay.
was working on those, because I love mark making, and I describe them as tribal marks and symbols.
Yeah, I'm
I
really
feel like
intrigued
they're
by that.
coming from a different time, a different place, and
Yeah.
but I was listening to his music when I was painting, and I sometimes continue to do that. So yes, it does. It absolutely influences.
Oh wow, that's really, really interesting.
Yeah. And
Um, I kind of suspected that somehow. I don't know. That's why I guess I asked it. What do you mean by tribal marks, tribal markings? That really intrigued me as well.
yeah, and maybe I'm misstating, but I guess what I mean by that, just a very bold, raw, um, marks that have like an old, to me, an old world,
Yeah.
ancient feel to them. I just love, I mean, mark making in general is fascinating to me.
Mm.
But when I see some artists use that, and it kind of reminds me of, I'm not that I know much about African art at all, but some of the patterns
Mm.
and some of the, the cloths and quilts and artwork I've seen
Mm.
just really particularly resonates. And so I label that tribal art, tribal marks
Mm.
versus
Would
Yeah.
the word Aboriginal apply to it also?
Aboriginal. Yes, yeah, very much.
Because I was thinking of some of the work of yours I've seen, and it seemed like some of the work was a little bit like Aboriginal work from Australia. Though I know we're talking about a different continent, you know.
Well,
So
no, but that's so true. That's so true, Alan, because I actually love, I can't cite anything specifically right now, but I absolutely love a lot of the art coming out of Australia.
Mhm.
Most definitely. As a matter of fact, as a side note, I love the class I had taken. It was an online class with an artist from Australia, Lorna Crane, and she makes her own handmade brushes. She's very much inspired by her landscape, and
Ah.
she goes around and she collects materials and branches from her hood, and she makes these brushes that she uses. She uses a lot of mark making in her art. And that was kind of the appeal in taking that class, because I wanted to do the same thing. My love of mark making, and I love the idea, the connection, the personal connection you have making the brushes from materials you find right around your own
Yeah.
space. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I saw a picture of those on your Instagram gallery. Did you actually use those? Have you been using?
I have.
Oh,
I have
wow.
to confess, though, the only ones I really like are what Lorna calls her smudgy brushes. And
Okay.
that's because they hold a lot of ink and they make really bold marks. And I
Mm,
definitely love bold marks. So,
that's
but I
fun.
haven't
But
used
the
them in a
whole
while.
okay. But the process of making them, that's another form of self-expression, I guess, isn't it? And
Yeah,
you're
it is.
using materials from your environment. Um,
Mhm.
Sue, you keep saying the phrase mark making as if it's something completely normal that everybody does, and I guess what painters do, but still, like Alan and I are, not painters in that way. Alan's had more
You're
experience.
wonderful photographers.
Oh, thank you. But
For
we
image makers. Alan
image
prefers
makers.
images because there's so
Yeah.
much more to what you do,
Yeah.
right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's a different process and it's a different interaction with the medium. But and I've got two young children and then they love making all sorts of marks. But I just like to know, what does that mean for you? What is the significance of it for you? Because it's obviously something very meaningful that you do.
It is. Oh, that is a tough question. Sometimes it's just, I feel like, and that's what I love about art. It's just kind of in my bones. Sometimes I'm not sure. It's just
Hmm.
something I love.
Hmm.
While we're on the subject of art making, the question occurs to me: do you ever make marks with your non-dominant hand or with your eyes closed?
Oh.
I have tried doing that. And there is a real beauty to that. I mean, I find with the marks I make, uh, if I'm at all, I can tell if I'm mistakenly using my thinking brain, because as soon as I'm thinking about what I'm doing, they're awful. It looks contrived, it looks fake.
Wow.
It's all, I know that I'm, working in the right side, well, without, in a non-thinking, but I think very valuable mode when I'm just letting it come through me. It's really kind of fascinating to see. And yeah, I can tell in them, as soon as I make one, I think, is it right? It's like, yeah, damn, I'm thinking about it. Stop.
How do you stop yourself thinking?
By pausing, what helps me a lot is pausing And instead of thinking, just feeling. It's like, what do
Okay.
I feel like?
Yeah.
That's the key word for me. What do I feel I want to
You know,
do?
that strikes me as coming more from your heart than from your head, which actually,
Yes.
you know,
What do and I have stopped myself a few times because, the design principles are in our heads and they're valuable.
Mm.
But when I find myself kind of thinking too hard and thinking about what I should be doing, it usually backfires on me. Where if I pause,
Hmm.
until I was painting larger, I was painting right on a table. I
Okay.
was doing works, like small, 8 by 10, 11 by 14. The biggest I think was 18 by 24. And I literally would do most of those on the table and then put them on the wall to look at them. But now that I'm painting larger, and for me, it's no more than 36 by 48. What I'm
Okay.
doing is I'm affixing the paper to a large cradled wood panel. There's one back here, actually.
Okay.
And that allows me to answer your question. I can move that board around. So I'm oftentimes painting with the work propped up on the board against the wall. So I have that perspective. I'm turning it around all the time. Sometimes I'm putting it on the floor, but having it on the board that allows me to move it around works really well. Because I know some artists who paint large literally tack the works on the wall.
Yeah.
And that's, I was getting frustrated with that because I need to move it around. And I just, and think about what I want to do, what I feel, then that's usually right. And that's actually, the art instructor, he's very well known. He wrote a phenomenal book on expressive drawing. Stephen Amony, I think I'm pronouncing his name correctly. That's his advice to artists. He's very much into expressive drawing, non-objective art. And he had said, just always go with your guttural reactions rather than what you think, because that'll always get you going down the wrong direction. And if you don't have that, he calls it a guttural response. If you don't have a guttural response, stop, walk away until you do. And I think that's been good advice for me.
That's really interesting. It reminds me of the anecdote you told about how you broke down weeping, crying
Yes.
when you were watching a video of an abstract artist.
Yes. I'm
Can you tell us
actually,
more about that?
I am. I'm glad. And because it might be helpful to viewers, because I think the lesson there is, man, pay attention to those intuitive urges, which you
Yeah.
feel in your gut, and follow those. Because even before I thought about picking up a paintbrush, I've always loved art, always loved it, but I never thought of actually painting myself. And then back in 2016, I was studying to be a tour docent. And I stumbled onto a video by the artist Krista Harris. She's a very expressive abstract artist, very much inspired by the landscape, very expressive, paints large. She had a video just sharing how she paints, what she was doing. And I remember she was before a large canvas and she was just making these big gestural marks. I started weeping uncontrollably, crying my eyes out. And it's like, what in the world is going on? I was totally puzzled, had no idea.
Yeah.
And then fast forward a couple of years, and I'm painting one day, and I had that aha moment. It's like I literally think my soul was crying out that I needed and wanted to do that too. And a couple of times as I've been painting larger, where you're required to use your body more. A couple of times I actually got welled up, and there was nothing unusually poignant about what I was doing, but just the expression, the process of doing it was emotional for me.
That's fascinating. I was going to
Yeah.
ask you about, I know, your studio space is relatively limited, but how you use your body. I mean, are you always standing up when you paint? You talk about, stepping back. Your process seems very physical.
It
That's
is actually, it's very physical. I mean, the painting keeps me from my gym practice, which is kind of troubling, but I think I'm getting a lot of physical activity. I really am.
Does
Yeah.
that affect your sense of control or the spontaneity that you want to get? Because I imagine working on a very small scale, like you feel like a god, like you can see everything that's going on. Whereas if you're a bit larger, you may have to scan from one side to the other, or it's just physically larger than you, so the relationship is different. How does that work?
Oh, absolutely. It's a totally different experience. And I have to say, even though it's challenging for me, I've only been painting larger since this past November, so not very long at all. But I love it. I'm still finding my way with it. Totally different experience
Mm,
uh, because I can't be as in control. It's just
right.
not possible.
And you
And
like that sort
I
of.
do. It's hard. I don't think I've done a couple of paintings that I feel good about, but I'm clearly still finding my way. But it's been fun.
Or do you work strictly on paper, or have you worked on canvas at all?
Yeah, Alan, I have a couple, as a matter of one of the pieces I share is on canvas. I had a couple of large canvases, and so I am painting on those. But for the most part, I paint on paper. And then when display opportunities come along, I mount it on cradled wood panels.
Mm.
Um, and and it saves space. This way I can stack the sheets of paper far more easily in my small place
Yeah.
than if I was painting directly on panels.
Do you have a particular weight and thickness of paper that you prefer?
Yeah, I definitely, because man, I really work, I really work the surfaces.
Yeah,
I need very durable paper. So
yeah.
I sometimes use extremely heavy, I can't tell you the weight, the heaviest watercolor paper I can find, but also Bristol paper. I
Mm.
discovered through actually Steve Ammoney's expressive drawing class, the benefit of using Bristol paper. It's extremely durable. It holds up really well, and I think it is archival. Considering the amount of paint I'm putting on there, I'm not worried about that at all.
So it looks like you're sitting in your studio right now. Is this where you work?
Yes, yeah, it's working for me. I'm really impressed. I'm impressed with myself. I rearranged the studio in the fall, uh, and got rid of a few things that allowed for it.
So here we have some pictures of your studio. So do you want to talk a little bit
Yeah,
about it?
yeah,
How you
sure.
work?
It's really just a second bedroom in my very small townhouse. And it's all of about 9 by 12 feet. That's really all it is.
Mm.
And as you can see, now that I'm painting larger, I literally have a cradled wood panel that I prop up on paint cans. And
Mhm.
again, I work mostly on paper. And so this happens to be a piece of unstretched canvas, but I typically work on paper and literally just tape the paper on this board. And then that allows me to freely move it around, rotate it, put it on the floor, put it back up on the paint cans as I'm working. The other thing that's notable here is I love using wet palettes, and that's what you see on the table there. I have
Oh.
two
Mm.
going. I learned about that from, I think a lot of artists use it, but I learned about that from that Creative Visionary program I had taken,
Mm.
where I have cafeteria trays, lined them with the shop towels that you get at a Home Depot, and then add water to it so it's not too wet but moist. And then I use tissue paper. I put a sheet of tissue paper over that, and it's amazing how that keeps acrylics wet for easily a day. I have
Mm.
I usually at the end of the day I usually put another cafeteria tray over the top, and it keeps the paint wet. So it's been incredibly helpful.
So this piece that you have in the top picture, I assume that's a work in progress.
Yeah, that's a very early one. Actually haven't even started on it. I had done some initial, added some color and some marks to it going back, I think a good 6 months ago, and I had put it aside. So I think I'm ready to work on that. So I literally just taped that back up, and I want to start working on that in the next week. The one on the floor has been not, I've been struggling with for too long, but I think it's taken shape. So I just have that aside right now. And that's just another shot of the, that's the other side of the small studio. And you could see I have a lot of great storage there. And those cabinets are all on rollers, which makes it easy to move.
Sue, just out of interest, how long on average would you say it takes to produce a piece? I know that might be difficult to say. It's interesting that you put some things away, or you've got some kind of sense of like, this is the beginning now, and I want to do something later. How long would you say?
Yeah, it does. I wish it went faster. I really do. It's seldom it's typically a few weeks for me. And sometimes the work comes together pretty quickly within a matter of a few days. But oftentimes it's over a span of a couple of weeks. What I do find is, and this is a mistake I've made, where I really do react too quickly to what I've done. And I kind of ruin or kill the freshness of a piece. And even when a piece feels like it's close to being done or nearly done, I have the, I want to say I'm improving on this, but I have this desire to always try and improve it. And I've often ruined pieces and painted over them because of that. So the key for me is not reacting. And when something is nearly done, even if I'm not 100% happy with it, put it aside for a couple of days, preferably a week. And then looking at it with fresh eyes makes all the difference in the world.
Yeah. Now here's some of your self-made brushes. Can you talk about those a little bit?
Yeah, those are smudgy brushes. Those, and that's courtesy of Lorna Crane. But those are branches that I just found right in my area. And I did sand them and clean them up a bit, at least a couple of them.
Well, they look very tactile. I mean, I can just imagine holding them and how it feels to hold them.
Yeah, especially that long one. I really love, I mean, that's just how the branch was. I just spotted it. It's like, oh my gosh, this would be great. And of course, you don't have a lot of control when you're using it, which makes it even better. And I put it on a backdrop of, those are some of the bold black marks it can make. It works well with fluid paint or with ink.
So interesting to say that you don't have control using it. I would imagine that would be one of the qualities of a brush that an artist wants, it's fine control, for example. What do you mean? You like it because you can't control it?
Yes, I mean, there's so many artists. I'll tell you, there are plenty of artists, and Julie Schumer comes to mind. She's an artist in Santa Fe. I think I mentioned her. She goes out of her way to choose tools that don't provide that do exactly that, where she loses control. Or doesn't have that control, because those are where the surprises and the wonderful marks come through.
So this is the first one we have to look at.
Yeah.
And you've talked a lot about making marks and tribal marks. So as we go through these, maybe you can tell us more about that. And also going back to that phrase, the focal area. Like in this one, what do you see as the focal area?
Yeah, obviously, I'm calling this vessel. Well, yeah, vessels, the vessels themselves. What's kind of interesting is this might be a good example of the kind of the search for structure. I can't remember whether I created this the basis of it, I don't know if I was just using like the dry brush method of using paint on my paper, or whether I was making a monoprint using a jelly plate to get the texture here. But that's actually where I started. And of course, I wanted to bring some structure to it. And I decided to define it by creating, I guess what I see now is vessels or containers. But it didn't start out that way. I just, that was the structure that I decided to go with in this piece.
So also in this piece, it looks like there's a bit of texture. So how did you create that texture?
Yeah, that was just, I think that was just a dry paint, it's acrylic paint using kind of the dry brush method on watercolor paper. So that watercolor paper has a lot of texture to it. And it just picked up the paint differently, especially when I applied that dry brush method. You know, not much water, but applied the paint that way.
So it's a real wabi-sabi sort of feel to this, you know, like faded. You know, it's something that's maybe been, you know, aged with weather. Um, how do you feel about that? Is that an influence on your work? Are you trying to achieve that effect?
Yes, you want to know. Not that I can. I love the concept of wabi sabi. You know, perfectly imperfect. Just striving. You know, I haven't always honored that because of my desire to kind of control and edit, but that's certainly a goal of mine to allow more of that to come through.
On this textural area, it looks like the paint was actually built up a little bit. I mean, are there different layers of paint here, or did you just achieve this effect some other way?
Yeah, you have a great eye, Alan. And you know, it's just because it's hard for me to remember on this one because this is back a few years ago. But I think that's exactly what happened. I think I must have, I may have just been, you know, using up some leftover paint from my palette on some watercolor paper. And I saw I liked the texture, and I clearly went back in with transparent paint and enhanced or bumped up those areas. So I think that's exactly right. And I think the green, I may have colored that, chosen to color that greenish color, that yellow green. So definitely there are layers on there. And actually the outline, that was back when I was using, I used to use fine line applicators. They take fluid ink, ink and fluid paint. I would fill the applicators up, and you can draw thick and thin lines with it. And I think that's how I outlined this piece.
Well, I love this one.
Oh, thank you. This is, you know, this is interesting because looking at the date, and I think this is the only example of it in this sample PowerPoint. But back in 2021, during COVID, without realizing it, I think a lot of the work I was doing was reflecting some challenges I was having in my personal life with communication and misunderstandings and that sort of thing, and with family members. And what's interesting is looking back on it, I see that was reflected in the work. You know, my how I used shapes and the interaction of shapes, they almost seemed like relationships to me, as does kind of like the disconnected and kind of renegade lines in this piece. When I was making it, I had no idea, but just looking back on it, I think that kind of was a reflection of what I was feeling at the time.
So talking about your creative process, I look at this one and I'm really curious. if you remember how you put this together. Like, did you start by laying down a background layer of paint, or did you start with marks? Did you start by drawing shapes and filling them in? I'm really curious about your process from that viewpoint.
I think what I always loved about collage, and I almost felt like it was a little bit of a crutch, was it helps me bring structure to a piece pretty comfortably and easily, and that's that's what happened here. I started with the background is acrylic. That's acrylic paint with graphite, and I think I was just trying to bring structure to the piece. And I remember those collage pieces, if I'm not mistaken, I made those for this collage. I took some paper I had on hand and just start cutting it out and laying it down in a pleasing fashion. And then I came back in with oil stick and added those lines. So that was the process on that one.
I love your titles, by the way, and I do feel that that must be an influence from your writing experience. What do you feel about the urge to give something a title? I love the way that you kind of retrospectively gave this significance and kind of realized maybe what you were expressing. Many abstract artists, and I'm not quite sure if that's how you would identify yourself, but they resist giving such explicit titles to the works, and they might just say, you know, number 113 or something like that. What's the relationship there between the titles and the paintings and pictures for you?
Yeah, that's interesting, Paul. I appreciate that question. I'm glad that the titles resonate with you, because I wasn't necessarily sure they would.
Oh yeah, they're like poems. I love them.
They with very rare exceptions, I don't title the works until they're done. And then I'm almost looking at the pieces as if I'm looking at them for the first time. And I just look at them and think, okay, what does that feel to me? How does the piece feel to me? And that's usually how I come up with the title. And so that's exactly, I had no idea what was going on in my head when I made this, but when I looked at it, I thought, this kind of feels like disconnected conversations to me.
I could see that. I love the way that especially on the right, the black acrylic turns into that white graphite. That's fantastic. You know, just shifting from one from that kind of gray concrete to the sort of charcoal gray of that block at the edge. I like that, going from one thing to another, but then it's not quite matched. So there's something missing in the communication there. That's really interesting.
I just love lines. I think that's probably
Yeah.
my most favorite, even though it seems like shapes dominate my work. I absolutely love lines. I mean, they lead me. That's, they lead me, I think. When I'm stuck in a piece, if I start adding lines there, that's what gives me direction.
You know, and speaking of lines, I've just been really sitting with this, but these two white lines, my eye keeps coming back to them. They just feel, it's hard to describe it, but they feel kind of comforting somehow. And I'm guessing that's maybe my intuition connecting with your intuition. You know, I think, I don't know. You know, and sometimes when you're talking about abstract art, to try to put it into words is like self-defeating. You know, it's like, what's the point of even trying to describe what is happening here? But I love these shapes. And you know, you mentioned earlier in this conversation about in your previous career how you did have some tangential graphic design experience, and I see that here. And this particular part of the piece just really resonates with me, and just the way you piece the pieces together, and the lines, and the visual decisions you've made just really kind of speaks to me on a nonverbal level.
That's actually wonderful to hear. Thank you. This conversation is making me want to go back to doing more collage again. So I may scrap my goals.
I think you should. I really,
Yeah.
really love them. Sue, how do you describe or introduce yourself to people? What kind of artist do you describe yourself as?
Yeah, basically non-objective art, non-objective mixed media, because I do like using, I use acrylics, but I also love, I love oil sticks and pastels and graphite and charcoal
Hmm,
and collage.
hmm, that makes
Oh,
sense.
wow.
But non-objective, because I don't really like, even though I mean, I appreciate all art and I love abstracted realism and I love abstracted figurative work. But for me, as soon as I see something, typically something recognizable
Hmm,
happens to appear in one of my pieces, I usually obliterate it. For some odd reason, I don't want any kind of hints of the real world in my work at all.
ah,
I noticed too in the works we've seen so far, they're all vertical. And so I'm kind of curious about your format and how you choose your format. Do you work in horizontal or is it mostly vertical? And
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, Ellen. I do favor vertical. I'm always turning the pieces around when I'm working, but I tend to favor the vertical. And I think it's because I want it to read as purely non-objective. And sometimes with a horizontal format, it sometimes reads as a landscape.
mm,
So I think that could be part of it.
mm,
And I like the power. I guess I like the power of a vertical format.
mm.
what do you mean? The power?
I
Sorry.
know. Well, that's just kind of my it just seems to have more of a commanding presence. Although having said that,
It's really
I
interesting.
love a lot of Robert Motherwell's work, and he's done some pretty bold, pretty amazing horizontal pieces. So I don't know.
Hmm.
Well, as you say that, it kind of strikes me that the vertical indicates a standing position, whereas a horizontal indicates laying down. So maybe the
Interesting.
vertical is a more active kind
Hmm.
of shape rather than the more passive horizontal.
That's fascinating. I think that's fascinating, and that just really rings true for me. I may steal that if I'm ever asked the question again.
I am looking at this, and to me, this almost looks like text. Is that a conscious thing, or was it some words you were putting in that you kind of obscured the meaning of, or like what's behind these marks?
Actually, just intuitive marks.
Hmm.
I used a fine line applicator. I think I mentioned that to you. I know I used a fine line applicator
Yeah.
for this. I actually just like the feel of those lines. This is even though this is an old piece, this is a personal favorite of mine. I have it hanging in my house. And that's cardboard. I did use some cardboard in that, and that's why that. But yeah,
I'm always intrigued in abstract art to decisions that the artist makes. And I'm looking at that little yellow spot up in the
Hmm.
upper left-hand corner. And I actually covered it up with my finger and it becomes a different painting without that. So I'm really curious, where did that little yellow spot come from? Really?
Yeah, I'm trying to think. Sometimes those things are the happy accidents that happen,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
I think that was deliberate, but very much in non-thinking mode.
Mm-hmm.
I think if I was thinking about it, I would not have done that, or I would have come
Yeah.
across differently. I don't
What
know.
do you
It's
mean
just
by
one of those
non-thinking
things
mode?
where I want to add this, so I do.
Well, Sue, that's really interesting how you talk about being in a non-thinking mode. And then if you had been thinking, you wouldn't have done it. So do you regret it now that you're thinking about it? Obviously not. So
No.
that's
Oh,
really, really intriguing. Do you ever do you ever make a mark or some kind of application of paint, and do you regret it later, or do you totally trust your non-thinking mode?
Oh, no, there are plenty of times when I'm using, well, this is interesting. There are plenty of times when I'm in non-thinking mode
Yeah.
and I overdo. I do too much. But
Okay.
that's why I always have wet paper towels handy, because
Ah,
normally what I often like better is I let go and I go ahead and I overdo, but then I go back in and I wipe a lot of it away. And
okay.
it's often usually more pleasing that way, because it also creates a freshness and more of a spontaneous feel to the marks.
Okay.
A lot of that was all done intuitively. I mean, I was I had lost hope. I still remember that. And I just I just decided I'd go in and kind of destroy it. And it's kind of interesting. That's all the gouging. Uh, and I guess that points to why I think painting intuitively, your
Hmm.
non-thinking brain knows so much more than your thinking brain when it comes to the creative process.
Well, the
Hmm.
marks on this really reminds me of I know Alan loves this artist, Antoni Tapies. I
Yeah.
think you might like him. There's a real even the color as well, I think. But especially the
Interesting.
marks.
I was cutting into the paint, so the yellow you see there is an underlay. This kind of reflects what I mean by tribal marks in a way.
Hmm.
My term for it,
Yeah.
I can see that. And Paul Klee as well. He kept coming to
Oh,
mind when I
yeah.
was looking at your work. His
I love his work.
language that he invented, and that those I can't remember the exact term that he used. I'll try to look it up, but the kind of the marks he was making that resembled letters.
And that mark, I'll tell you, that was really interesting. That was another one I still remember. I was kind of finding my way. And I don't think I made them with one clean movement, but some of the black, that's exactly what happened. I mean, I know that was all done in non-thinking mode. Boom, boom, boom. And just got lucky because it came together. It doesn't always.
I think pictographs is the
Oh,
phrase or
yes.
that's
Yeah.
Clay used. How influenced do you feel by graphic design?
I remember when I wanted to learn as much about it as possible, I would, pour over award-winning display ads because I love the typography that was used and the use of negative space. I just was really kind of letting go and having fun with it.
Hmm.
Hmm.
And so I think that's what it represents for me. This is kind of the previous pieces were more of that, what I would call those raw tribal kind of mixed media collages. This is kind of moving into more, in a way, it's kind of has a controlled quality to it, but I'm trying to bring more painterly surprises into it. Like those white marks, I mean, those were just kind of arbitrary, bringing in some, I may have even poured the paint on there. This, I think this was, I'm trying to think about this one. This is collage, and then I went back in with paint, but I think this was a collage that I decided I didn't like and I cut it up. And they found their way into my collage tray and I ended up using it in this way. And then I went back in and I added paint to it. There's an overlay of paint on there. I like how it extends. You probably can't tell. This is on a panel. And what the white border around it, that's just what the paper the panel is sitting on to photograph it. And I did that just because the collage elements extend beyond the perimeter of the panel. So this is a reflection of the newer work. And now I'm now thinking about going back to the collage based on this discussion. But this is pretty much all paint and charcoal. And this is an example of where I was trying to find the structure, and I started making marks with the charcoal, and that kind of helped me find my way with this piece. Really appreciated your time and looking at it. I just think that's so generous of both of you.
What are the responses to your work? We've given our responses, but do other people respond in the same way? Have you ever been surprised?
What I do isn't really mainstream. I think a lot of people don't really get it. It doesn't really resonate with
I think it
the
would,
average
though.
person.
I have a
Yeah.
feeling you have shows in your future.
Thank you.
Again, thank you so much for
Thank
joining us.
you.
I really appreciate the time you spent with us and all your comments and taking us deeper into your work. It was a real treat.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.